Hello there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. It's Superfly Comics Guy bringing you yet another Spider-Man Omnibus review today with the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 4, just in time to coincide with the reprint that came out this past week, so I'm here to help you decide if this is something you want to pick up, because I'll be taking you through the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through where I can share some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on the stories in here. So, if you enjoyed the video at any point, you know how to show it, and please feel free to chime in down below in the comments with your own thoughts. But with that out of the way, hold on to your loved ones, and let's get going. Alright, so starting off here with the standard cover to this omnibus. This is a image by Frank Cho, which is very much a spoiler, but I get it. This is easily the biggest story in this omnibus. I don't think it's a particularly good cover. It kind of feels like the outcome of a brainstorming session that never quite finished. It's like, hey, we want to have a cover showing the death of Gwen Stacy, so let's have Spider-Man holding Gwen Stacy. Oh, but we should also have death in the background, and then, oh, Green Goblin has to be somewhere on the image, so let's put him there. We should also feature the bridge at some point, and everything just feels kind of disjointed. It doesn't really blend together very well. There is also a direct market cover, which is the cover to issue number 135 by John Romita Sr., which is very interesting, very interesting sort of, paneling techniques going on in that cover, especially for back then. But this cover's all right, I suppose. Here is the spine. This is an older printing that I have, so I have the big, bold lettering here. The new printing will have smaller lettering and also an image on the spine there. So that's how you distinguish between the two. And then the back, we have your classic cover gallery, which I always love to see. We're collecting the Amazing Spider-Man issues 105 through 142, and then Giant Size Superheroes 1 and Marvel Superheroes 14. The cover price of this omnibus is $125 US, $158 Canadian, and I believe that's more or less staying the same for the reprint as well. So let me show you under the dust jacket here. There we are. So like I said, this is an older printing. Newer printings will look a little bit different. There might be some more color, but generally this is what you'll be getting. Spine again is a little bit different. And I think the newer printings tend to put like the Spidey logo on the back as well. But there you go. Let's start flipping through the contents. All right. Now, before we start getting into the flip through, I just want to say, because this story is on the cover of the dust jacket, I consider it fair game to talk about. I won't go into the details of the story itself, but I will kind of talk about the outcome and the impact that this story had. So keep that in mind. I'll also announce it when I get to it, but I would like to talk about this story. But all right, let's start diving into this book here. Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 4. This is quite an interesting period for Spider-Man, to say the least. We got some credits pages here, and man, do I love to see this. I love it when they put a table of contents for the omnibuses. I don't understand why the modern books don't do this as much, but it's just so convenient to have like all these issues laid out for you. You see exactly what time frame you're getting. We're going from 1972 up until 1975. And you got page numbers as well, so you can easily navigate around the book. It's just great. But yeah, so this time period, if you watched my Volume 3 review of this series, this Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus series, I mentioned that Volume 3 was kind of the tail end of Stan Lee's main run on the Amazing Spider-Man title. And, he would come back later, and you do still get a little bit of Stan Lee in here. But this era is mostly where you get Jerry Conway coming in, this sort of first changing of the guard here, which is very interesting because Jerry Conway actually grew up as a fan of the Amazing Spider-Man comics, reading the ones by Stan Lee, and then he got to become the new writer at 19 years old. That is crazy for me to think about. I definitely wasn't doing anything that interesting at 19. And yeah, when I talk about this sort of silver/bronze age of Spider-Man, I've typically described the other volumes as sort of, Pretty goofy, pretty cartoony. Feels like individual episodes of a TV show, each of the issues. And yeah, you do still get that sort of goofy vibe in here every now and then, like with stories like involving the Spider-Mobile. There's a bit with Human Torch and Spider-Man. They have to engineer this Spider-Mobile. I guess because Marvel wanted to sell toys. Because really, why does Spider-Man need a Spider-Mobile? Let's be honest. There's some funny stories with Mysterio, actually, towards the end involving that as well. There's an infamously goofy story in here involving Aunt May and Dr. Octopus, which, if you don't know about, I won't spoil it. Some goofy characters like, oh god, the gibbon, the kangaroo comes back, the grizzly, who's just like this dude in a bear outfit. So yeah, there's still some goofy stuff in here, for sure. But you also get some serious stories in here, and you start to detect this sort of shift in the storytelling. For example, Harry's drug problem continues, the story that was introduced in Volume 3. We get more development of that here, so it's cool to see that we're sort of starting to establish this idea of longer running continuity, rather than every single issue being completely self-contained. But the biggest serious story that I want to touch on is the one I mentioned at the beginning. The one that could technically be viewed as a spoiler by some people. But, you know, if you don't know who Gwen Stacy is or her story, then this will be a spoiler for you. But most people and most Spidey fans will know about this. So I do want to talk about the story, and that story is the night that Gwen Stacy died, which is easily the star of this omnibus. If I was talking to somebody and I asked them, what do you think is the most influential Spidey story? And they answered the night that Gwen Stacy died, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? I could see it. I could see that argument easily. And Marvel very much knows that too. They know the power and significance of that story, which is why they market it so heavily on that standard edition cover. Now, I'm not going to flip through the story because, like I said, I don't want to go through the details of what happens, but I will talk about, you know, the big outcome, which is featured on the cover, and then sort of the impact that it had. And speaking of which, man, it's crazy to think about the far-reaching impact that that story has had. I mean, I've had conversations with some of my friends who aren't as familiar with Spidey comics, and if I mention Gwen Stacy, they'll be like, wait, she's the one that died, right? There's actually a section in here where Jerry Conway talks about the decision to kill someone important to Spider-Man, how they were considering around this time maybe killing Aunt May, but then Jerry Conway said, come on, guys. Aunt May has had so many death scares already. That's exactly what everybody will expect. So what if we pick someone that's even closer to Peter? Someone younger, where the stakes feel even higher. And so they settled on Gwen Stacy. And man, that story still holds up. Even if you know what is going to happen, it's still so gripping. The way it all happens especially is just so tragic and almost feels real in a sense, because it's this character that we've gotten to know and grown to appreciate over the course of however many issues, snatched away in an instant. And despite Spidey trying his best, he just couldn't save her. He failed. And you get to see how that impacts Peter both during that story and also going forward. There's a very clear distinction between the before Gwen died versus the after Gwen died. It just wrecks him and you feel so bad for him. But it's not just the Amazing Spider-Man book that felt this impact. This was a big deal at the time because this happened at a point in time in Marvel's history where their mantra was, when someone dies in a Marvel comic, they stay dead. Now, obviously, that doesn't really hold true anymore these days, but back then, you can tell that story really kicked down the door and gave further proof that you could tell mature, impactful stories in comics, that they weren't just kids' books. And regardless of what Marvel has done with Gwen's legacy and some of the stories that would follow in later years, it doesn't change the significance of the night that Gwen Stacy died, which has been referenced in so many ways since then. For example, in recent movies such as The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or the example that sticks strongest to me, an episode of the 90s animated series, man, where, well, in there they basically replaced Gwen with MJ, but so good. I owned the DVD containing those episodes. Man, I don't know how many times I watched those episodes. So good. I'd say even if you don't want to check out this whole omnibus here, I definitely recommend you find a way to at least read issues 121 and 122 of Amazing Spider-Man. They're just too iconic to pass up. Now, speaking of iconic, one of the other reasons I really like these older Spider-Man books is that you get a lot of first appearances. Like, in here you'll get the first appearance of the Punisher, the Jackal, Hammerhead, Man-Wolf here, the Tarantula, Mindworm. There's another second appearance by the Kangaroo. You know, obviously not all these characters were home runs, but it just felt like such an interesting time. They were just coming up with all these new characters, throwing them at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's really cool. It felt like a really creative time. And in terms of the art, you're not getting as much Romita art in this book compared to the others. You still get a little bit of Gil Kane, who I've talked about in Volume 3. He's generally pretty great, very similar to Romita. I'm not a fan of the way he draws Spidey's eyes as like teardrops sometimes, but that doesn't really happen as often in this omnibus. The big up-and-coming artist you get is Ross Andru, who's doing more of the art in here. I'd say Volume 5 is where you get even more of Ross Andru, but he's really cool. You can see some examples of his work here. Let me see. Yeah, Ross Andru. So one of the coolest things about Ross Andru, and he kind of goes as a bit of an unsung hero in Spidey comics, but he's really good at making the setting feel like New York, always including like landmarks that you can kind of point out and see. Like there's the docks and the piers. You can tell that's New York. He would always include big notable buildings and landmarks that makes it feel like Spidey is swinging around New York City, which is really cool. Now, swinging on over to the extras section here, we actually get quite a decent amount of extras material. You're going to see things like pin-ups and house ads and additional art. We won't go through everything, of course, but I'll give you some ideas here. Some cool little activities. There were some featurettes involving some of the creators like Stan Lee, Jerry Conway, John Romita. Pencils and layouts you'll also get in here. It's really cool. I've said this several times, but I find the extras in these Silver and Bronze Age books so interesting because it just feels like you're getting a slice of history. You know, the farther away, the longer away something happened, the more special it feels to be included in here, at least in my opinion. But yeah, you get some pencils and layouts here, character designs. Man, yeah, now we're seeing some of the images from that iconic story I was talking about, which I'll try to skip over a little bit here so we don't go into too many spoilers. But yeah, character designs for the Punisher, coming up with the names. Should we call him the Grim Reaper or the Executioner? Nah, I'm glad they settled on Punisher. Very cool. Cool name. And then you're also going to get some cover reprints towards the end here. Yeah, here we go. Whoops. Flipped a little farther than I wanted to. There we go. Some of the covers you're getting here. And afterward, by some of the creators like Stan Lee, talking about, you know, just the legacy of Gwen Stacy and this story. Crazy. But that pretty much takes us to the end here. We're ending off here with an image of the standard edition cover, but that is that. So as for the build quality here, keep in mind once again that I have an original printing of this omnibus. which came out in, I think, 2019 or something like that. But yeah, you can see what my eye looks like. Absolutely fantastic. Nice and big. What's gutter loss? I have no clue what that is. There's absolutely none of it in here, and of course the buffered white space helps with that. I'm not sure how the newer printing would stack up. I imagine the binding would be probably a little bit stiffer if we're going by recent trends. But yeah, this is fantastic. The pages are quite good. I don't recall ever noticing any instances of page bleed on this omnibus. It lays over really great. You got the table of contents, the page numbers, just fantastic build quality on this printing here. But here we are, guys. Time to wrap up with some closing thoughts. If you're into Bronze Age comics, there's no way you're not familiar with some of the material in here, and you'll most likely be interested in it, but I don't think you have to be a fan of the Bronze Age to enjoy this. There's a lot of solid material in here that holds up really well even to this day, and it's particularly interesting seeing the shift towards more mature and serious stories being told here. Of course, they're not all home runs. There is still some of that textbook comic book goofiness in here, like with the Spider-Mobile and the kangaroo and the grizzly and some issues with Aunt May. But when this book hits its stride, it's on fire, man. Overall, I wouldn't say this volume is as strong as volume 2, but I would say I enjoy it more than volume 3 and maybe even volume 1. So this gets an easy recommendation from me. But that's been my review of the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 4. You let me know what you thought about the book, the review, the big story in here. Are there any readers who read this story when it came out? I would love to know that. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave them down below. But for now, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to catch you in another video really soon. So have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye, guys.